Picture yourself on a remote island off the coast of Scotland, standing near a large, old-fashioned summer house that seems both grand and humble at once. Its sturdy stone walls and wide windows looking out over a restless sea. It is the early 20th century, just before the outbreak of World War I, and this summer house belongs to the Ramsay family. They have gathered here with a handful of friends, scholars, artists, and admirers to enjoy a long, languid holiday. Outside, the landscape is dramatic. Sky, ocean, and rolling hills stretch in every direction. Just across the bay, a distant lighthouse rises from a small, rocky outcrop, standing like a watchful sentinel. It's this structure, the lighthouse, that will come to symbolize so many things. A promise deferred, a vision pursued, and the mysterious ways in which time changes all that we understand about ourselves and the people we love. Welcome to the world of To the Lighthouse, a novel by Virginia Woolf, where the plot ebbs and flows as gently and sometimes as turbulently as ocean tides. At its core, To the Lighthouse is not driven by a single moment of high drama, but rather by the subtle emotional currents of everyday life. The longing, the disappointments, the quiet triumphs, the grief, and the persistent search for meaning that fill each character's mind. Still, as simple as the day-to-day may seem, the novel is anything but dull. Within its pages, passions flare, hopes rise and fall, families grow and fracture, and lives are irrevocably transformed by the unstoppable march of time. In this summary, we will follow the Ramsays and their guests from the earliest moments of their summer holiday, when a young child's heart is set on a single promise, to the final journey years later that will bring closure, understanding, and a sliver of peace. We will see how the perspectives of multiple characters blend and collide, how memory and imagination shape reality, and how art, both painting and philosophy, serves as a lens through which these individuals try to comprehend their world. Our story opens in the world of the Ramsay family. Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay have invited friends and acquaintances to join them in their summer home, and the atmosphere is charged with the energy of so many distinct personalities sharing a single space. Mr. Ramsay, a respected philosopher, is both admired and feared. He has a sharp intellect, a demanding presence, and the tendency to assert intellectual authority over those around him. Perhaps he is a bit vain about his brilliance, or maybe he's just desperately insecure, always craving reassurances that he is capable, important, and valued. His wife, Mrs. Ramsay, by contrast, is the emotional heart of the home. She radiates warmth, beauty, and a gentle yet firm kindness that seems to make everyone want to stand a little closer to her glow. She creates harmony out of discord, soothes worries, and nurtures fragile egos, often quietly, without fuss, but with lasting impact. She is the gravitational center pulling everyone into a gentle orbit. Among the Ramsay children, the one who stands out immediately is young James. It is James who longs to visit the lighthouse. Ever since he can remember, he has looked out across the bay, scanning the horizon where the slender tower stands tall and pale against the sea's shifting blues and greens. To James, the lighthouse is more than a building. It is a dream, a promise of adventure, and an emblem of all the excitement and meaning life might hold. As the story begins, Mrs. Ramsay suggests that if the weather is good tomorrow, they might take a boat to the lighthouse. James's heart soars at the idea, but almost immediately Mr. Ramsay, ever the realist, interjects. The weather looks uncertain, he says. Almost certainly, they will not be able to go. This small contradiction cuts into James like a blade. He worships his mother and resents his father's cruelty in snuffing out this small spark of hope. In James's young mind, his father's pessimism is more than a difference of opinion. It's a fundamental challenge to joy and imagination. In the crowded rooms of the house, we meet the guests whose interactions will shape the emotional tapestry of this day. There is Lily Briscoe, a young painter who struggles with her art and her sense of self. Lily is quiet, observant, and unsure. In a world that often tells her that women cannot be great artists, she wrestles with doubt. She wants to paint a scene that captures something essential about the Ramsays and their world, particularly Mrs. Ramsay and James sitting together. But she's not sure how to stabilize the composition. She's caught between how others expect her to see the world and the way she truly sees it. Then there's Charles Tansley, a young intellectual who idolizes Mr. Ramsay. Tansley is prickly, self-important, and quick to criticize. He insists that women cannot write or paint, not understanding the damage his careless remarks inflict on someone like Lily. Yet Tansley, like Mr. Ramsay, seems painfully insecure, constantly seeking approval and validation. We also meet Paul Rayleigh and Minna Doyle, a pair of young lovers visiting the Ramsays, brimming with youth, passion, and plans for their future. They have come to this summer house to enjoy the splendors of nature and the comfort of good company, perhaps not realizing that their youthful optimism is as delicate as a daisy in a stiff breeze. Andrew and Prue, two of the Ramsay children, watch them with a mix of fondness and curiosity, seeing in them the potential for love, marriage, and all those milestones of a life well lived. As day turns to evening, Mrs. Ramsay effortlessly orchestrates a grand dinner that will become a central moment of togetherness. The setting sun casts warm colors across the dining room, and in that delicate twilight, the guests gather, each bringing their moods, tensions, and unspoken questions. Mrs. Ramsay's presence at the head of the table is like a beacon of calm. She invites conversation, soothes conflicts, and ensures that everyone feels noticed. Yet even in her warmth, there is a quiet melancholy. She is painfully aware of the fragility of human connections, how easily misunderstandings arise, and how swiftly life can shift. Still, she works her subtle magic. The dinner, with its elegant dishes and flickering candles, becomes a moment when souls touch. Although no grand epiphany is declared aloud, under Mrs. Ramsay's gentle guidance, people sense that life can be beautiful and harmonious, if only for a short time. Lily watches Mrs. Ramsay throughout this evening with a mixture of admiration and frustration. She admires her hostess's ability to bring people together and create a sense of unity. But she is also aware that Mrs. Ramsay's worldview is rooted in a certain Victorian ideal of womanhood, patient, nurturing, often sacrificing personal ambitions. Lily, trying to forge her identity as an independent artist, wonders if she can ever reconcile these contradictions. The call to domestic harmony versus the individual pursuit of art and truth. As the night deepens, Mr. Ramsay's insecurities rise to the surface. He seeks from his wife the validation that he cannot give himself, some reassurance that his intellectual work matters, that he is brilliant and vital. Mrs. Ramsay gives him what he needs, though it costs her some quiet strain, and he leaves her feeling bolstered. She then visits her children, tucking them in with a motherly tenderness that makes even the most restless child calm. In these gentle, almost sacred moments, we glimpse the deep love Mrs. Ramsay has for her family, even as she yearns for moments of solitude. The first section of the novel ends with this sense of potential, the promise of a trip to the lighthouse hovering in the air, though still uncertain. The characters have come together, revealed subtle hints of their inner lives, and retreated back into their own private thoughts. None of them realizes just how fleeting these moments are. The world is on the brink of huge changes. This Edenic summer can't last forever. In the second section, the novel leaps forward through time, shifting the tone dramatically. Years slip by like sand through fingers. The once vibrant summer house stands empty, neglected. Storms batter its walls. The Great War rages in Europe, death and destruction reverberating through the lives of these characters, whether they are present on the page or not. We don't see events unfold in detail. Instead, we see their aftermath. It's as if we've stepped into a long, quiet corridor lined with half-shuttered windows, through which we glimpse flickers of tragedy, loss, and change. We learn of Mrs. Ramsay's death. It happens off-stage, suddenly mentioned as a fact, yet its impact is immeasurable. The radiant center of the household, the gentle force that held everyone together, has disappeared. With her gone, the house falls into disrepair, her children scattered into their separate lives. Andrew, one of her sons, is killed in the war. Prue, her beautiful daughter, dies in childbirth. These tragedies are conveyed almost as whispers carried on the wind. The focus is not on grand funeral scenes or drawn-out laments. Rather, it is on how absence hollows out a space. The once bustling home, full of laughter and gentle arguments, now stands silent, furniture draped in white cloth, dust gathering on sills, and nature encroaching on once tidy gardens. This shift in time and focus reflects one of the novel's central themes: life's impermanence and the inevitability of change. Where once the question was whether the Ramsays would visit the lighthouse tomorrow, now the question is more existential. How do we reckon with loss? How do we understand the meaning of lives that flicker and vanish? There is no voice to comfort us now. Instead, Woolf shows us that the world continues to turn, the seasons cycle on, and time passes with an indifferent grace. Within this silence, Lily Briscoe and some other guests eventually return to the house after the war. They find it changed, haunted by absence. Lily, in particular, senses that Mrs. Ramsay's death has left something unfinished in her own life. Lily's painting remains incomplete. The vision she once had of capturing a moment in time, of arranging lines and colors to express a truth, is still elusive. Yet now, the painting no longer feels like a simple creative exercise. It's become a quest to reconcile the past and the present, to give shape to memories and emotions that have only grown more complex. Years have passed, and the Ramsay family, now reduced and altered by time and fate, returns to the old summer house. Mr. Ramsay has aged. He carries himself with the weight of grief and the burden of his own intellectual legacy. He is no longer quite the same formidable figure who once crushed young James's hopes with a pessimistic remark. He is softer in some ways, yet also more demanding in others. He needs reassurance that life still holds meaning. With him are James, now a young man, and Cam, his daughter. They have returned to the place that shaped their earliest memories, but the absence of their mother is palpable in every corner. The silence of the house, once filled with Mrs. Ramsay's presence, challenges them. They feel her ghostly influence everywhere. How she would have arranged the furniture, what she would have said at breakfast, how her laughter would have filled the gaps in conversation. Now at last, Mr. Ramsay decides to fulfill the promise made so many years before. He proposes that they sail to the lighthouse. For James, who once longed for this journey with a child's fervent excitement, the prospect now stirs complicated emotions. He does not feel the pure joy he once did. He harbors resentment and hurt, old wounds that never truly healed. Still, he boards the boat with his father and sister. On this small vessel, father and children must navigate the choppy waters of their relationships just as surely as the physical waves. The journey to the lighthouse is no longer just a holiday outing. It symbolizes the attempt to bridge past and present, to find closure, and to acknowledge that life moves forward even after profound loss. Back on shore, Lily Briscoe sets up her easel. She faces the empty lawn, the old garden, and the distant line of the sea. She summons the memory of Mrs. Ramsay, feeling the woman's presence as strongly as if she still sat there knitting or reading a fairy tale to a child. Lily tries to return to her old painting, the one she never completed. But now, the painting is more than an attempt to please or impress anyone. It becomes Lily's way of understanding what has happened, of giving shape to the years, the deaths, and the emotional transformations that time has brought. She wants to capture in form and color what words cannot express, the poignant mixture of longing, grief, and love that defines human existence. As Lily paints, the narrative shifts between the shore and the sea. On the boat, Mr. Ramsay is tense. He tries to engage James, to compliment him, to connect. James, standing at the tiller, navigates the boat and focuses on the horizon. There's an unspoken tension. Will James finally earn his father's praise? And does he even want it anymore? Will Cam break the silence and acknowledge the loss they all feel so keenly? The physical journey to the lighthouse is fraught with emotional undercurrents. Every glance, every word, every adjustment of the sail carries weight. On shore, Lily battles her own demons. She struggles with the line in her painting, how to place this brushstroke, how to balance the composition. The act of painting becomes a metaphor for making sense of life. Just as she tries to harmonize colors and shapes on her canvas, she attempts to harmonize the contradictory truths of her memories. She remembers Mrs. Ramsay's quiet power, her ability to bring harmony without suppressing individuality. She recalls that long-ago evening meal, the light shining on the fruit bowl, the subtle glances and smiles that created a momentary perfection. She thinks of Charles Tansley's sneers and the limitations placed on women artists. She thinks of love, friendship, and the uncanny passage of time. With each carefully placed brushstroke, Lily aims to forge a coherent picture from these scattered shards of memory. As she works, she feels closer to something like a revelation. On the boat, as they approach the lighthouse, James and Cam silently acknowledge their father's presence. Mr. Ramsay, so long starved for reassurance and understanding, does not receive a grand declaration of love. Instead, he receives something subtler, the absence of open hostility, a tacit willingness to share this moment. James, now older, sees the lighthouse not as a magical symbol of childhood longing, but as a solid, real structure, stripped of the romantic aura it once held. And yet, reaching it feels significant. The journey itself, though fraught, has brought them closer to an unspoken reconciliation. They cannot recapture the innocence of the past, but they can accept the present. Reaching the lighthouse acknowledges the passage of time and the necessity of confronting life's realities, even when they disappoint the dreams of youth. Meanwhile, Lily's brush hovers over the canvas. In a final intuitive gesture, she places a line in her painting that completes it. This is not a literal completion. There's no official audience, no critical acclaim. But for Lily, it is a moment of personal fulfillment. She feels a sense of resolution, of having expressed something essential. She has managed to capture, in shape and color, the ephemeral truth that Mrs. Ramsay represented. She has reconciled the contradictory impulses within herself, the need for independence and the love of human connection, the admiration of Mrs. Ramsay's nurturing spirit, and the desire to forge a different path. In completing her painting, Lily achieves her own quiet triumph, an internal harmony that mirrors the resolution the Ramsays find in visiting the lighthouse. Throughout this narrative, each character undergoes subtle yet profound changes. Mrs. Ramsay, who never lives to see the final return, remains a guiding spirit. In life, she was the center of their world. In death, she becomes a memory that guides their actions and shapes their understanding of love, art, and meaning. Her quiet influence endures, showing that the truest legacies are often felt in the whispers of memory rather than in public monuments. Mr. Ramsay's journey takes him from a position of dominance and intellectual pride to a more humbled, vulnerable state. Initially, he demands constant reassurance and validation, and though his insecurities never vanish entirely, by the time he steps onto the boat, he is a man who has lost his wife, his children's innocence, and his younger self's certainty. In the final journey, he learns to accept the love his children can offer, even if it is not delivered in the form he expects. He learns that meaning can reside not only in grand philosophical declarations, but also in small acts of shared experience. Lily Briscoe's transformation may be the most striking. At the start, Lily is timid, unsure of her artistry, constantly battling the voices in her head and outside that say a woman can't paint, can't create something lasting. Through the years, as tragedy reshapes the Ramsay family and the world around them, Lily finds the courage to paint not to please others or prove anything, but to understand herself. By the end of the novel, she has found her artistic vision. She sees that art can bring order to chaos, can hold on to fleeting moments, and can honor people long gone by giving their presence a form that defies time's erasures. James, who once hated his father for destroying a simple childhood dream, grows into a young man who can look upon that same father with a more complex understanding. He does not forget the pain of disappointment, but he realizes that human beings are layered and flawed, though what seemed like cruelty might have been insecurity or uncertainty. Cam, too, learns to navigate her father's moods and expectations with a calmer sense of self. Both children, once reliant on their mother's mediating presence, learn to negotiate their relationships without her. To the Lighthouse brims with themes that resonate long after the final page is turned. At the heart of the narrative is the relentless passage of time and the impermanence of life. The novel asks, how do we find meaning when everything slips away? People, youth, opportunities, and the illusions we hold about ourselves and each other? Another central theme is the complexity of human perception. Each character sees the world differently, filtered through personal fears, desires, and insecurities. Reality, the novel suggests, is not a fixed entity, but a mosaic created from multiple viewpoints. Mrs. Ramsay's nurturing nature, Mr. Ramsay's intellectual rigor, Lily's artistic eye, all are valid ways of understanding the world, yet none offers a full picture alone. Art and creativity emerge as powerful responses to life's transience. Lily's painting stands for the human effort to seize the ineffable essence of moments, to make them last. Through art, the intangible love, memory, personality can be given tangible form, granting a kind of immortality. The novel also contemplates gender roles and societal expectations. Mrs. Ramsay embodies a traditional femininity that soothes and comforts, while Lily struggles against a world that dismisses women's creative endeavors. Through their silent dialogue, the book explores whether women must choose between nurturing others and pursuing their own artistic visions, or whether a balance, however uneasy, is possible. Finally, the lighthouse itself symbolizes the human need for a guiding principle, a fixed point in a shifting universe. At the start, for James, the lighthouse is a promise. Later, for the family, it becomes a destination laden with emotional baggage. For Lily, it is part of the landscape she tries to paint, an object that exists outside human time, steadfast yet remote. The lighthouse endures while people come and go, suffer and rejoice, love and lose. It stands as a beacon both of hope and of the stark reality that life continues onward, no matter what befalls us. The Isle of Skye in Scotland serves as more than just a backdrop. Its weather and landscape reflect the moods and themes of the story. On that first day, when Mrs. Ramsay promises the trip and Mr. Ramsay doubts it, the weather's unpredictability mirrors the uncertainty of human plans. The sea is at once inviting and foreboding, its waters shimmering in the summer sun and roaring in the silence of war and loss. The physical decay of the house during the war years symbolizes the internal decay of relationships, the erosion of hope, and the vacuum left by death. The cultural and historical moment, just before and after World War I, underscores the novel's concerns. The world that Mrs. Ramsay knew, rooted in Victorian ideals and relative stability, disintegrates. In its place arises a more modern, fragmented era where old assurances no longer hold. Characters must adapt to new social and artistic frontiers. Lily's painting, forging new ground for female artistry, and Mr. Ramsay's faltering philosophical constructs highlight a world in flux. The shifting cultural landscape demands that each character find new ways to connect with others and to anchor themselves against life's uncertainties. Reading To the Lighthouse, or, in this case, immersing ourselves in its story through this detailed summary, is not about linear plot points or shocking twists. It's about feeling the weight of a silence in a formerly bustling room, the ache of regret when a parent's love feels conditional, the quiet triumph of creating something meaningful out of chaos. Woolf invites us to inhabit these characters' minds, to feel their longing, their frustration, their rare but intense joys. We come to understand that what truly matters are not the big events that history books record, the wars, the treaties, the inventions, but the subtle movements of the human heart, the dinner conversations, the dreams that never came true, and the paintings that try to pin down a fleeting moment. This emotional core keeps the novel alive long after its final pages. And in summarizing the book, we aim to retain that sense of intimacy and longing. We see ourselves in Lily's doubts, in James's resentments, in Mr. Ramsay's pleas for reassurance, and in Mrs. Ramsay's desire to make the world beautiful and harmonious, even if only for an evening. As the story ends, no one proclaims any grand lesson. The characters don't break into a speech about what they've learned. Instead, the peace that arises is subtle. On the shore, Lily quietly has her moment of artistic clarity, finishing her painting and feeling that somewhere, Mrs. Ramsay is acknowledged and understood. On the boat, James and his father reach the lighthouse. They have finally fulfilled the promise that began so many years ago. Though the experience is not as James once imagined, there is a sense of completion, of something resolved. The journey to the lighthouse has become a ritual of closure, a way of confronting loss and change head-on. The final strokes of the story remind us that life is a tapestry of beginnings and endings, losses and recoveries. We see that it is possible to move forward without forgetting what came before, to carry the memory of loved ones into a new era. Lily's painting will endure, at least in her mind and memory, capturing the essence of Mrs. Ramsay's presence. The lighthouse still stands, watching silently as generations pass through, and the sea continues its eternal dance under shifting skies. Ultimately, To the Lighthouse guides us to an understanding that the beauty of life lies in its very transience. Just as light shines and dims, just as waves crest and fall, our lives unfold in moments, some joyful, some painful, but all ultimately meaningful because we inhabit them fully. In returning to the lighthouse after years of absence, the characters demonstrate that we can make peace with time's relentless flow. Lily, finding the final line for her painting, shows that we can capture truth and beauty even if only in fleeting glimpses. And in recalling Mrs. Ramsay's grace, we see that those we love never truly vanish. They remain with us, illuminating our journeys like a distant but unwavering beam of light. In this layered, emotionally rich narrative, Virginia Woolf distills the essence of human existence: longing, loss, love, art, and the quiet search for understanding. Although the plot seems simple at first, a family trip delayed and then finally undertaken, the emotional currents run deep and wide. By the end, we feel as if we too have traveled to the lighthouse, not just physically, but in spirit, and emerged with a more profound sense of what it means to live and remember.